Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives as usual. And, Jim, it's a Friday in the middle of summer, so it's a really quiet news day. There's not much happening at all, in fact. Actually, that's not true. It's never true anymore. Let's go to the good martini. This is courtesy of The Hill. House GOP leaders plan to bring a Democratic measure calling for the abolishment of the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, otherwise known as ICE, to the House floor, hoping to force Democrats into a difficult vote. The Democratic bill introduced Thursday would create a commission to examine ICE's responsibilities and then recommend transferring them to other agencies. Republicans see the growing Abolish ICE movement as a political winner that will make at least some Democrats running in swing districts uncomfortable. Quote, Democrats have been trying to make July 4th about abolishing ICE, which is a radical extreme position that would lead to open borders and undermine America's national security. Steve Scalise, the House Majority Whip, told The Hill. Here's what House Speaker Paul Ryan had to say about this idea a little bit earlier.
They have really jumped the sharks on the left. They have really. It's an amazing. I think it's Pocan's bill from Madison. You want to abolish the Immigration and Customs and Enforcement Agency. This is the agency that gets gangs out of our communities, that helps prevent drugs from flowing into our schools, that rescues people from human trafficking. They want to get rid of this agency. It's the craziest position I've ever seen, and they're tripping over themselves to move too far to the left. They're out of the mainstream of America, and that's one of the reasons why I feel very good about this fall.
So, Jim, some Democrats who have talked the talk on ICE will now have the chance to walk the walk. It's obviously not going to pass. Reminds me a little bit of Charlie Rangel's effort a number of years ago to bring back the draft when the Iraq War started and so forth. So what do you make of this strategy?
Yeah, I was kind of struck by the statement from members of Congress, the three Democrats who are pushing for this initiative. Said, quote, "We know Speaker Ryan is not serious about passing our Establishing a Humane Immigration Enforcement System Act. So members of Congress, advocacy groups, and impacted communities will not engage in this political stunt." Greg, when they hold the vote, do they hold up a big sign that says this is a political stunt and not an actual vote? Like the votes count, goes into the record, congressional record the same way. It's going to be in the CQ Weekly, the same what I began my career doing. It's going to be in the papers the same way. If it passes, it passes. I don't think it will, as you mentioned, but and the also things they say, if Speaker Ryan puts our bill on the floor, we plan to vote no, and will instead use the opportunity to force an urgently needed and long overdue conversation on the House floor. Look, why would you vote no? If this is a good idea, defend it. If this is a good bill, defend it. If you're voting no, you're kind of suggesting that you're not really serious about this bill and that you're just trying to do it to garner headlines and placate your base and look like you're doing something. Or at the very least, when you guys introduce legislation like this, you should say something like, Mr. Speaker, I am introducing this bill, but I don't think we should actually pass it. I didn't mean that. This is entirely meant for grandstanding. It is not meant to be actual legislation or something like that. So, really kind of and I know they're calling it a stunt, but look, guys, you keep complaining you don't get your bills to the floor. Here's your opportunity. Just see how many votes you get. The Republicans are betting you're not going to get many votes. You guys can bet otherwise. This is, as you say, this is we want to have an urgently needed and long overdue conversation. Have that conversation. Make the pitch for your bill if you really genuinely think it's a good idea. Our sneaking suspicion is that you don't actually want to do that. You want to grandstand. You want to pose like you want to reform ICE, but you kind of recognize that too explicitly endorsing it might endanger your situation for the 2018 elections. Put your money where your mouth is, guys. See what happens. If you guys vote no, what's going to happen is you'll end up with a 0 to 435. Actually, we got a bunch of vacancies, so let's say 0 to 429 type vote, and then you have an even worse headline. If you at least get all the Democrats to come together and vote for it, well, then you've actually got at least you got that headline. The Democrats are united behind this. If Democrats vote no, which I think it's one of Ryan's bets, and it only gets, say, 100-some votes, well, then, yeah, it looks pretty bad and also demonstrates that there's significant Democratic opposition to this bill, which, oh, by the way, only creates a commission, insists that they not eliminate any positions, which is like the one thing conservatives might like about it was the idea it could actually reduce government employment a little bit. And, you're waiting to come back to hear from the commissions. And, oh, by the way, I'm not really sure how a congressionally appointed commission can overrule decisions of the head of the executive branch on how an executive agency operates. But that's just me. I'm crazy that way.
Yeah, what do you care if the Republicans are legitimate in their motivations? This is your bill. You should be proud of it. You should encourage people to vote for it if you really think that. So we'll see what happens. That's a little bit crazy on the part of the Dems, obviously. But, Jim, let's move to our bad martini, which also certainly has crazy overtones. And that was yesterday's marathon hearing in the joint session of the House Oversight and House Judiciary Committees featuring the testimony of disgraced FBI agent Peter Strzok. 3 different clips here. First of all, the defiant tone of Peter Strzok, placing himself as the victim and Vladimir Putin as the victor, as the Republicans take a look at these text messages and allegations of bias.
I have the utmost respect for Congress's oversight role, but I strongly believe today's hearing is just another victory notch in Putin's belt and another milestone in our enemy's campaign to tear America apart.
He also tried to explain away his text saying "we are going to stop Trump" meant the American voters. And when he referred to a bunch of hillbillies, he wasn't talking about Trump voters, Jim. He was talking about people who live in Loudoun County, the wealthiest county in the United States of America. But it wasn't just Strzok who was angling for the cameras. On the Republican side, you've got Louis Gohmert of Texas, who decided to point out the fact that Strzok's credibility is in question because of the fact that he carried on an extramarital affair for quite a while.
And I've talked to FBI agents around the country. You've embarrassed them. You've embarrassed yourself. And I can't help but wonder when I see you looking there with a little smirk, how many times did you look so innocent into your wife's eye and lie to her about Lisa?
Mr. Chairman, this is outrageous.
Credibility of a witness
Shame
is
on
always
you,
an issue.
Mr. Chairman, please.
Have you Mr. Chairman, this is intolerable harassment of the witness.
What's wrong with that? You need your medication.
So there you go. That's on the Republican side. And, of course, the Democrats, their job all day long was to protect Peter Strzok. And here's Steve Cohen of Tennessee.
Gentleman from Ohio yields back. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Strzok, I don't know where to start. If I could give you a Purple Heart, I would. You deserve one.
All right, Jim. So Peter Strzok is a partisan. It's pretty clear he's not very credible about his explanation for the text. He claims one of them was late at night, and so he really doesn't know what he was texting about. And then, obviously, both sides trying to score political points here. What do you make of it all?
So I'm, not only no fan of Strzok, I think his dismissal was completely justified. I think he's, the vast majority of the criticisms thrown his way are credible, well-founded, with copious amounts of evidence, particularly from the Inspector General's report. I'm going to reserve more of my irritation for House Republicans, though. I think because I just expect more. That's Strzok being Strzok, although I do think the smug. I understand there's a Broadway show, a Broadway version of Mean Girls, Greg, and I understand that may be a really good audition tape. You may want to contemplate that. This goes back to Hillary Clinton and the Benghazi hearing. This goes back to Whitewater. This goes back to just about any congressional hearing that is perceived as being high stakes and or that the general public takes an interest in, because let's face it, Congress holds hearings, every day that they're in session, and most people don't really pay much attention to them at all. It's just not an issue that people are, it's not going to get live coverage for hours and hours. If you're the majority party, you've called the hearing, you generally have somebody who you want to have on the hot seat. This is a situation where, you should be able to shed a lot of light, even if you're going over the subject in a way that and then that political junkies know, because this is getting a great deal more scrutiny. This is your chance to really kind of go over it, to establish a narrative, right? To kind of think of it as a court case, right? Except the jury is the whole American public. And it's one of those that really kind of nagged me, is that you'd have the opening statement from the chairman, opening statement from the ranking member. They take turns, and everybody gets 5 minutes. Now, if you're really smart, you take your best guy, whether you think it's Trey Gowdy, the former prosecutor, or something like that, somebody who really knows this issue backwards and forwards, and everybody on the committee would just say, actually, Mr. Chairman, I turn over my time to my distinguished colleague, and you let that guy continue, every 5 minutes. But instead, what it's turned into is when you have a high-profile hearing, it's a way to get television attention. It's a way to get you're hoping to have, the big exchange. And if you're Louis Gohmert, you're probably pretty happy with the way yesterday went. If you're the rest of the Republicans, you're not. But, Louis Gohmert's got I'm sure he's going to be on Fox News soon. I'm sure it made him feel good. I'm sure it made voters in his district feel good. I think it was probably one of the few moments that made Strzok actually look kind of quasi-sympathetic. A lot of folks were saying, well, look, have you ever asked that kind of question to the President of the United States, Congressman Gohmert? All in all, there's a strong argument to be made that this is this is a leader at the FBI who you really can't trust, who let his own personal opinions start affecting his decisions. And there were times Republicans on the panel got to it and kind of started going down that path, but you've only got 5 minutes. And it's like each one of these guys on the panel wants to have their Sam Waterston in Law and Order, how dare you, sir, type moments. At this sort of thing. And I think it never gets the way they want. Remember, Hillary Clinton answered questions for, I believe it was 11 hours during the Benghazi hearing. And it, really didn't do the damage or didn't have the impact that congressional Republicans hoped for. Now, the opposition party is going to basically be the defense attorney. You can wish for a better world that they wouldn't be that way, but that's the way they are. This is the era we live in, which means you have to raise your game. And I really just think all in all, congressional Republicans did not do everything they could because every single guy there wanted to be the star and every single guy wanted to get the footage of them berating the witness instead of actually trying to get the witness to say things that will be more revelatory, perhaps even new information that will help help advance the argument rather than everybody give a clip for a campaign lad down the road or something.
Yeah, I got to watch some of the hearings on replay yesterday. I didn't get to watch them live. But I don't know if you watched them, Jim, but one of the things that always bugs me in these types of situations where people are grilling these high-profile witnesses is they get the 5 minutes, like you mentioned. They give a 4.5-minute spiel, and then at the end they'll say, isn't that right, Mr. Strzok? And that's the 5 minutes how they use it.
Again, you probably want the witness to be talking for more than half of your 5 minutes and as much as possible. You don't want to let them filibuster, but, maybe yes or no questions, right? Again, what are you? You're up against a clock, and most of these guys don't act like they are, and with predictably disappointing results.
All right, let's move on to our crazy martini now. And as most people know, the President of the United States has been overseas for most of the week. He left the morning after his nomination of Brett Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court. He went to Belgium first, met with the NATO countries there. There's been a lot of coverage of that. He's currently in the UK. He met with Theresa May this morning, and as we record, he's about to meet with Queen Elizabeth. I'm sure that'll be an exciting tea. But the big headline from the last 24 hours is the interview Trump gave to the UK Sun. And, Jim, you give an excerpt of this in the Morning Jolt today, which I'll read now. Theresa May's new soft Brexit blueprint, the Sun reports, would, quote, kill any future trade deal with the United States, Donald Trump warns today. Mounting an extraordinary attack on the Prime Minister's exit negotiation, the President also reveals she has ignored his advice on how to toughen up the troubled talks. Instead, he believes Mrs. May has gone the opposite way, and he thinks the results have been, quote-unquote, very unfortunate. His fiercest criticism came over the centerpiece of the PM's new Brexit plan, which was unveiled in full yesterday. It will pour nitroglycerin on the already raging Tory Brexiteer revolt against the Prime Minister. And in more remarks that will set off alarm bells at number 10 Downing Street, Mr. Trump also said Mrs. May's nemesis, Boris Johnson, who resigned over the soft Brexit blueprint on Monday, would make a great prime minister. And that, of course, set off a lot of reaction on cable news and beyond. Here's Caddy K with Morning Joe this morning on MSNBC.
And it was halfway through this dinner with Theresa May and 150 British business leaders that we got news of this interview. You can't imagine how the rest of that dinner turned out. This is worse than just going to dinner, however, and insulting your host while you're there. Theresa May's government, her leadership hangs in the balance this week in the UK over this Brexit plan. And Donald Trump has just taken a bulldozer and driven straight through that plan and potentially straight through the Prime Minister's leadership.
But then Trump and May met this morning. They had a joint press conference, and Trump's wondering what all the fuss is about.
I didn't criticize the Prime Minister. I have a lot of respect for the Prime Minister. And unfortunately, there was a story that was done, which was, generally fine, but it didn't put in what I said about the Prime Minister. And I said tremendous things. And fortunately, we tend to record stories now, so we have it for your enjoyment if you'd like it. But we record when we deal with reporters. It's called Fake News.
Fake news. So, Jim, Theresa May has been, I would say, probably weaker and more disappointing on some subjects than we'd like her to be. But the alternative in England right now is a Marxist named Jeremy Corbyn, who heads the Labour Party. So for Trump to be kicking May in the shins and perhaps undermining whether it's a hard or a soft Brexit plan here, probably not the smartest move.
You know, Greg, one of our recurring themes on our podcast is way to go, Nevada, way to go, because of the re-election of Harry Reid. We may remember the alternative in that race was Sharon Angle, who had said her share of odd things. But all in all, that we thought she would be an improvement. You could live with her wacky statements. And I remember someone who, tried to advise her campaign said, you don't have to answer every question you're asked totally honestly and truthfully. And the second piece of advice he had given her was something like, it's okay to repeat yourself. You don't have to come up with something new in every single interview. And it was sort of like, you don't have to say the first thing that pops into your mind in every single one of these interviews. I suppose in a very strange way we could say this is a very honest interview by Donald Trump. I think he means everything he says. And one of the statements that I thought was very revealing in there is he says, Boris Johnson's a friend of mine. He's been very, very nice to me, very supportive. And maybe we'll speak to him when I get there. Again, if you don't, if you're Boris Johnson, I don't know how much that helps you over in UK politics, and I wonder if it probably makes you look like you may have, helped nudge Trump to make statements like this. But there's just a lot to unpack here, Greg. Among them, it's one thing for you and I to have opinion on Brexit. We're not setting U.S. relations towards the United Kingdom or anything like that. I don't have any connection to Woody Johnson. Because if I did, things would be very different over the last couple of years in other projects Woody Johnson does, the former owner of the Jets, who's now our ambassador to the United Kingdom. Should the U.S. government have a strong policy on Great Britain leaving the EU and Brexit? I think it's safe to say that we should be, we should respect our partners. We should say, all right, they've had their referendum. We hope it works out well for you. Good luck. If there's things we can do to help smooth things along, we'll be happy to do it. But by and large, that's not really our call. I don't know how much we should have enormously strong opinions, and at some point it does start to appear like meddling. But even if you do, okay, Theresa May, look, she's having a very tough time over there. Maybe there are other figures in the British Conservative Party who you'd prefer to have in positions of leadership over in the UK. I don't know how openly you want to make that statement, and I don't think it makes a lot of sense for the American president to say, yeah, I really don't like the current prime minister, but this guy over there, I really like him. I think he'd make a great one. I hope to make him someday. Considering Trump's popularity in the country, I don't think it's a guarantee this is going to work out the way he hopes. And some people are saying this might be the best thing that's happened to Theresa May in a while. If it looks like the president of the United States is picking on her, then all of a sudden, the Brits might have greater sympathy towards her or something like that. So he does this before the meeting. Like, it's really, if you're going to say something nasty about a foreign leader, don't do it right before the meeting. You do this, maybe on the plane ride home, you do the Sun meeting or something like that. Now, this morning, he comes out and he sounds like everything's hunky-dory, and he's, we've never gotten along so well. It's been so, whatever you guys decide is going to be fine. More than a few people have observed that, Trump is really tough in that newspaper interview. But once he's face-to-face in the joint press conference, I suppose we could either salute him for his diplomacy and his ability to his sudden appreciation for decorum, or all of a sudden he doesn't actually want to confront her over these sorts of decisions. He also said he didn't criticize her. I don't think you can really accurately characterize that. And to throw out the term fake news over an interview that was recorded just seems like a new level for President Trump. Again, maybe we would be better off with Boris Johnson being the prime minister of the UK. I think it's safe to say we'd be in much worse shape with Corbyn, who's not only, straight up, red socialist. I also was struck by his statement that he believed that supporting ISIS is just a political position and that you should not be prosecuted for supporting ISIS over in the UK. Jeremy Corbyn is the nightmare scenario of British prime ministers. So if you're Trump, you don't want to – I don't know if you want to be poking at Theresa May at a moment like this. It's entirely possible to give a vote of no confidence, try to select another Conservative Party leader, or you may end up having a snap election. And at that point, it's anybody's guess who the next prime minister would be. And I think the odds of Corbyn are – not to be underestimated. So that's where we are. I think it'll be a while before Trump goes back to the UK, Greg.
Might be right. Anyway, Jim, heading into the weekend, have a great one, and we'll talk to you again on Monday.
See you Monday, Greg.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today, and have a great weekend. Join us again on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.